editor-in-chief of TechNode.com, and I'm very grateful that everyone has come out to this event. I've been very much looking forward to this conversation on health tech, as I expect to learn a lot. So to begin, I don't know how many people here have ever been to a public hospital in China, but it's quite a lot like trying to get onto a ride at Disneyland. There's a lot of waiting. And China has an issue with the distribution of medical resources. They're concentrated in big cities, and within those big cities, they're concentrated in top-tier hospitals. For this reason, digital health and online doctor visits in particular are something that have excited people for a long time. They promise to equalize access to healthcare and to relieve the burden on top-tier hospitals. But it's not so easy to take a doctor visit and put it into an app. It's been a long time coming. But in 2020, it appears the stars have aligned. Changes in regulation have made it easier to provide digital health services, and the pandemic has driven millions of people to try digital health for the first time. In the next year, we expect to see a few companies, including JD Health and WeDoctor, go to the markets. So here to discuss this trend, we have Linda Lee of Vickers Venture Partners and Mark Zhang of King & Wood Mallesons. Linda is a managing director and partner at Vickers Venture Partners, which she co-founded in 2005. She is currently in the midst of closing a digital health fund. Mark is a partner at the international law firm King & Wood Mallesons, where he has worked since 2007. Since 2017, he has been recognized by the Chamber's Asia Pacific Guide as a noted practitioner in healthcare. He advises companies in life sciences and healthcare on a range of issues, going from M&A to compliance. So, let's get started. Linda, I wanted to start with you. And I wondered if you wouldn't mind giving us your overview of where health tech is today compared to 2 or 3 years ago. Oh.
Hello. Yep, good. Thank you, David. I'm Linda, work for Vickers Venture Partners. We're a US dollar fund, was founded in 2005. I joined when the firm started in Singapore, and I relocated myself back to Shanghai. So ever since then, we focus on biotech. For me, especially in China, digital health in the recent couple of years. And also we have other consumer technology which we have been investing in the past 15 years. So clearly, being a VC for 15 years, I see very obvious change in this couple of years in digital health, especially after this pandemic since January. I think just want to share a couple of interesting observations ever since this January or maybe February, because January, this is still okay. We're still in the mood of Chinese New Year. People don't really go to hospital based on the tradition. They don't think this is a good thing. But then February is really normally the month that, after the holiday, after the season, they have to, for certain patients, they have to have regular visit to the doctors. But one interesting thing is that firstly, they don't feel the hospitals are safe. And secondly, even from late March and early April, when the situation was actually clear in China in terms of controlling the disease spreading, it is still very troublesome for people to go to the hospitals as they have to face more complicated procedure. So I talked to a few doctors, I talked to the principals of hospitals, and they all feel that their business actually dropped up to 70% for a certain period, and then gradually come back to 50%. And now they're I think for the renowned hospitals don't feel the difference compared to before pandemic, but some of the hospitals still feel that they lose about 30% of their business. So clearly, where are the traffic going to? If they're not going to hospitals, they must go into somewhere. The somewhere is actually online. So I would say this is not an active motivation. This is a passive process, force people to go online. Because most of the patients, some patients, they just need regular prescriptions. They don't really need to see the doctor. So for this part of patients, certainly just go online consulting, diagnosis, because those are the light prescription. They know what they should get. And the delivery, and China is really proud of its e-commerce delivery. Delivery is so popular everywhere. So this is not a problem. That's one thing. So the traffic is going online. On the other side, if you look at the doctors, hospitals, they're eager for solutions, for online solutions. So this, in the past 4 or 5 months, we actively look at entrepreneur startups who focus on these digital solutions for healthcare system. They have a very easy business developing time. This is very good and healthy for the industry. So just give you an example. I talked to an entrepreneur. He's one of the leading digital imaging solution provider in China. And they couldn't close many provinces before the pandemic. Normally, their business development pace is about 3 to 4 months for one province. They found the right person, right agent. But in the past 4 months, they successfully closed 6 provinces. They found the agent, they found a hospital that covers 6 provinces, about 200 hospitals, lower level, higher level. So that's the second point, very interesting observation, means that hospitals are very open-minded. They change their attitude towards the new technologies. And lastly is actually the capital, because I'm working from a venture capital perspective. In the past, if I record the data correctly, about 3 years ago or 2 years ago, the average size of the healthcare, especially in the digital healthcare fundraising, average ticket size was about 10 million RMB. So it's about $1.5 million US. And today, the average size is was actually tripling the number. So that means what? That means the whole industry is clearly seeing some leading company. This whole industry have sufficient capital to back the innovation and technology development, and also bring the credible brand name in front of hospitals. What Chinese hospitals care about is that they don't want to talk to grassroots startups, because credibility, trust, and in the future, are those companies, if those companies are still in existence or not? So those are all questions that the hospital used to have. But if capital is pushing a few companies to be a clearly leader in the space, that ease the concern from the hospital side, and it's just give the hospital more credible brand name. It's just give them easier decision-making process. So these are the very, very interesting and very positive signal that we can clearly see in the digital health space.
Thank you. Mark, I understand that another major factor in the recent development of digital health has been changes in regulations. I wonder if you could describe where we are now in terms of licensing doctors to practice online.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, David. Thanks for having me here, join this panel. My name is Mark Zhang. I'm from KWM, King & Wood Analysis, which is a Chinese law firm. I focused my practice in the life science and the healthcare sector in the past 17 years. So in terms of digital healthcare, as Linda just said, this will be a very unforgettable year that we saw those challenges we face when we go to the offline hospitals. So there is a really boost to the online solution here. But actually, if we put the clock backwards for 2 years, actually 2018 is a very important milestone in the Chinese legal landscape of digital healthcare. Because basically before 2018, there was no nationwide framework to regulate the online healthcare, including online hospitals, online telemedicine or online selling of prescription drugs. So we'll see that before that, this whole industry has been going on like for more than 10 years. But before 2 years ago, we can see those online platforms, they're more focused on make reservations with the hospitals where they have those resources. They can't really go into the telemedicine sector because what they call is that they will provide so-called healthcare consultation service online. But actually everybody knows that the patients, the users, they go online to seek solutions for their diseases. But before that, the law was actually against any service provider or even any hospital go online to provide healthcare service through internet to patients. So it's sort of like a gray area. And everybody knows that the major market players were playing around during that gray area. But the thing about China is that we always try to let these new models grow for a little bit and test it out to see whether there's major compliance risk. So you will see that in certain cities, like in Yinchuan, like in Hangzhou, Wuzhen, like in Hainan, they have these pilot schemes and pilot projects laying out. And you have seen many of the big players today actually started very early from those places, while the regulatory environment was not that clear yet. But from 2018, after a very, very long debate, from the central authorities, they have issued 3 major regulations to lay the foundations of the current framework. They provide one, a hospital-to-hospital online solution, where there is one hospital can assist in another hospital's diagnosis and treatment activities through internet. That will solve the imbalanced resources across the region. That's for one. For two, a hospital, an offline hospital, can provide an online solution using their own HCPs, their own physicians and nurses. They don't need to apply for an internet hospital license. They only need to open that session and follow the rules, and they can provide online solutions. The most exciting model is number 3, is that a hospital or even a telecommunication company or any market player interested in this area, they can either, for a hospital, they can do it by themselves, but for a third-party platform, they need to partner with an offline hospital to set up what we call the internet hospital. And what this internet hospital can do is really to draw doctors and nurses from various hospitals across China to practice on that platform. So you can see that the third model is the most interesting one. It can really pull the resource and reflect the very essence of the internet business, right? But still, the regulatory has its concerns because it's an industry about the safety of life. It's about national security, right? So you want to make sure the door is open gradually. So far, the online healthcare or the internet hospital, they can only take cases for chronic diseases. And you can't make the first visit online. You have to complete your first visit offline, and then you can go online for your subsequent visit. And there are different detailed rules in different places. Like in some cities, they will require a patient, a user, to upload your medical record onto the platform first, and they need to verify the accuracy of the information, and they need to make sure those patient records are like within 2 or 3 months' time, and then you can use the service. So, and these kind of detailed rules are still different from city to city. So we see there is a very interesting dynamic. On one side, in the different cities, they are trying to attract this new business model to their place. And on the other side, the local regulatory are concerned that whether we are giving too much tolerance or are we too bold to allowing such kind of new business. So there will be a very dynamic topic going on.
Thank you. Speaking of national standardization, one of the currently China is working on building I understand, a national digital healthcare information platform. I wondered if you'd be willing to talk a bit about this. How far along is it? How standard is data, and what's the role for private companies in health medical records?
Maybe I can take a lead from the technology perspective, and then Mark can give us some insights from the legal perspectives. So yes, I think one keyword you just mentioned is called a national platform. This is very interesting. Because as far as a venture capitalist from a private sector, we see a lot of opportunity in this process for private businesses. So I can translate what I just said to the suppliers to this platform. The technology suppliers to this platform are not state-owned businesses. This is very interesting. So the whole system is sponsored by a bunch of privately owned, especially for those companies who has been working in this space for more than 5 or even 10 years, receive the capital from VC and PEs. They're privately owned. So in a nutshell, the ownership is quite different from what the government look. So that may trigger an imagination that the potential mergings or acquisitions from the state capital will eventually go to this private businesses, because you can clearly see that in other spaces as well, in fintech that happened before. People start from grassroots, and later on banks, nation held banking service organizations start to acquire these fintech providers eventually. So in terms of my perspective, this will be a very interesting future to look forward to.
Just echo to what Linda said. I think from business side, one of the major reasons why the investors coming to China is you're looking at the data, right? For pharmaceutical companies, they need to do clinical trials, and it's difficult to recruit patients worldwide, and China can provide abundant resources in that end. Also, you want to try the business models, given the landscape of China and the different sectors. Lots of players are really pouring into not only for selling their products and service, collecting data, and using that data to optimize their service and products, and also how to try to optimize their business strategy is an important factor. But on the legal side, lawyers always talk about legal challenges. I don't want to bore the audience with all the technicalities, but just listen to this, you can get an idea. In terms of data protection or cybersecurity, there is multiple layers of legislations and supervisions in China. To name a few, like patient record. Patient record is protected by law. You can't really take patient record out of the hospital. There is also a concept called population health information, where the medical institutions, they will gather and collect those big data regarding population healthcare information, and that information can only be stored in China, and you cannot really transfer it to overseas. And we also have this new big data healthcare information concept, and we also have this new law just coming out last week, is the draft for personal information protection, which is literally the China version of GDPR. Those private patient information is protected under the personal privacy protection law. And also very importantly, we already have we call it the cybersecurity law being issued and implemented for more than 2 years. That law actually puts lots of responsibilities on the market players. For example, you want to set up an online platform which makes you an internet operator, then you will be responsible for correctly handling of the data going through this platform, starting from collection, whether you have obtained all the consents, whether the way to obtain consents is correct, whether it's explicit consent or implied consent, and whether you store it correctly, because maybe you'll know that to transfer data out of China will be a very sensitive thing, especially regarding healthcare data. And there is a mechanism being made that you need to do safety reviews. Some of the safety reviews can be done by the company itself, but some of them need to be done by the authorities before you can transfer those information out. And also, if you want to utilize this information commercially, either by yourself or kind of provide to third parties, it also links back to how you got the consent, what's the scope of use, and also the framework of this regulation. So this will be a very, very dedicated area to navigate. And one other thing to mention is we also have we call it human generic material or human generic information regulation law, where if you do a clinical trial or you get information through diagnosis and treatment activities, if those information or those material falls under the so-called generic, human generic information material, then it will be more strictly regulated by law. So while these data resources are very attractive, we also need to be very careful about all those legal challenges in terms of data protection.
Thank you. Thank you. We've talked a bit about the challenges of using medical data, but Linda, I wonder if you could tell us a bit about about the potential of using medical data and what companies are using it for.
Yeah, I think Mark just mentioned a very interesting point. You know, the data actually belongs to the hospital, and let's say for a startup, if they want to provide their service to a certain hospital, one of the things that they have to pay attention is that they really have to leave all the data in the hospital. Means that they set up the separate individual independent server with the hospital instead of on the cloud or elsewhere. So it's very interesting, and I personally see a trend which is different from what happened about 2-3 years ago, because I think people here, we all heard of Ping An Good Doctors, We Doctors. All this company came from a similar business strategy. It means that they believe the end user, the patient, are the most essential resources that they have to gather in this process. But clearly you can see that to acquire the end user, it costs a lot of capital. And this happened in the e-commerce sector in China before, happened in many other, and many other sectors which was in this digitalization and internalized process. It is really, really capital inefficient. And the marginal, we can see when I joined the sector in 2005, there's a very famous formula saying that, hey, you don't really need to care about how much capital you spend on your user acquisition, because eventually revenue from user, we call it ARPU. ARPU eventually will cover everything within 3 years. And then 5 years after I joined the sector, it become like 5-7 years until now. And if you look at all the NASDAQ Chinese e-commerce related business, we don't even know how they can cover their user acquisition cost, right? Happening in the English education space. I personally still hope some doubts for this same strategy in this digital health space, because if that's the case, means B2C strategy is not efficient. It's proved by other sectors. So we see a lot of other companies which also raise decent money. Decent money means 50 million, 60 million US dollar. They're taking a different approach. They use B2B. B2B means that once they convince the hospital, once they convince the senior management of the hospital, then they cover the hospital. And if you think about the dynamics between doctors and patients, it is eventually a doctor-driven market instead of patient-driven market, right? I give you an example. So I think I have a fair knowledge of my mom's disease. It's because it's not so serious. And I use about a week to persuade my mom it's not serious. It's just not comparable to the doctor say it in 10 seconds and told her, hey, this is not serious. And she finally is assured. So that's the difference. Being a non-professional, non-doctor background, it's very hard to persuade people. So essentially, all this dynamic is very doctor-centric. I am actually a believer that these companies, although they are still in their Series B, Series C at the moment, they probably will take a future lead for two reasons. One is that obviously they're capital efficient. They don't need to spread all this capital to end user. They don't even know what kind of disease that end users have. And secondly, once you convince the doctor, the ARPU is not rely on the end user. The patient has no discretion, no right to say what they want or what they don't want. And the doctor actually can prescribe. But another interesting observation, I'm also a deep believer of Eric Topol. He's kind of like the leader in the digital health. He's really the person advocating digital health in the past decade. So Eric Topol, in his book, he wrote about what will the patient see in the future. Essentially, he called it about the democratization about medicine world. What does it mean? It means eventually the patient should be the center of the whole dynamics. But then you probably will challenge me that, Linda, is that self-contradictory if you promote the business model of B2B, which means that all these company startups are focusing on doctor more than the patient, and eventually you say the medicine world will be democratized, in terms of patient-centric. I personally believe this is not contradicting to each other at all. If you see other, democratization of all the sectors, it's all because firstly you have to have the infrastructure, technology, information flow, and then you have the base to empower your end user to realize what kind of rights, what kind of choice they will eventually have. Without the transparency on the information, there's no way for us to talk about the democratization of the medicine, about the patient. And eventually, when we empower the whole hospital system, as Mark just said, we have the system, we have the database, we have the regulations, everything is there. And the patient has a choice, has a base to act on it. So this will be, I would say the B2B model probably will be the nice thing to see in the next 5 years, but in the future democratization will be really the most beautiful thing I would like to see in the next 10 or maybe 15 years eventually.
Yeah, just quickly on to what Linda said. Actually, it's a very interesting topic. Whether it's like a doctor-focused model or a patient-focused model, I totally agree, as Linda said, that it's not contradictory to each other at all, because we see different business logics in both ways. Traditionally, and it's still true, that the patient behavior in China is very deeply impacted by the doctors. And in terms of the sales of pharmaceuticals and medical device, basically the vast majority of the volume is still driven by the hospital and the doctor's prescriptions. So if you want to set up an online business, then doctor focus will be a natural choice for sales of product and service. But also at the same time, we see a strong need to a direct-to-patient solution, especially for certain type of diseases and product. Taking Alzheimer as an example, we have helped a client who have successfully listed a very innovative disease-curing drug for Alzheimer, which with a conditional approval from China FDA. And what I learned from them is that for Alzheimer, actually most of the patients, they are not in hospital, right? They probably never go to hospital for that disease. But as a pharmaceutical manufacturer, you need to find a way to target those potential clients. And going through the hospital may be not the most efficient way. So we need this online platform. And by the way, what I want to mention as well is these type of drugs are all prescription drugs, right? And also before 2018, the prescription drugs were not allowed to be sold online. But we have this new law coming out last year, the new Pharmaceutical Administration Law, which also after a long debate, they finally lifted the prohibition of online sales of prescription drug. So put patient, if you put patient in the center of the picture, actually we are gradually building the whole ecosystem where you have to have your first visit offline, and then you can go to an online hospital for subsequent visit, especially for chronic diseases. And also online, the doctors can issue prescriptions, and you can get the drugs through various online e-commerce platforms. And we also have this logistics sector coming out. You don't need to really go into a drugstore to collect the drug, then they can send to you by couriers and the stuff. So we're gradually having this whole picture surrounded as patient-centric picture.
A question about this model. I mean, do you see at the center of it a one-to-one relationship between a patient and a particular doctor, or do you see patients? Do you see when you go to a public hospital in China now, you often get a different doctor every time you go? Do you see a one-to-one relationship between a patient and a particular doctor who's their doctor, or do you see people cycling through different doctors every time they go online to consult?
I think, as far as I know, at least the government is pushing this GP model, which has never been in China, at least since China was established. But as far based on the data I know, it would take a longer time. Here is the ratio. So they want each of the households will have a GP to cover. And the average size that GP need to cover is about 5,000 households. And that's a ridiculous number to cover by a GP. So essentially, I think the current model, which means that if I have certain disease, I will go to a hospital, especially for people living in the first-tier city like Shanghai, Beijing. We just we're blessed, we're lucky to have such kind of opportunity. So eventually, it will be for the next longer, I don't know how many years, but it will be doctor will choose which hospital, patient will choose which hospital, which doctor you will see instead of GP cover them. Because so far, we haven't built up a system which empower the GP to really have an effective reach to the household.
Yes, actually, I think the larger picture question of this topic is really about how to solve the imbalanced resource, how to better leverage the time of the top expert, especially if you're the field in oncology. Then they're always the very few top experts. They're always very popular, very busy, and the online solution provides an alternative to how to better use all their times. And people always may have this misunderstanding that we have insufficient infrastructure. Actually, it's not true. When you go to the top tier hospitals in Beijing, Shanghai, and Guangzhou, of course, you always see crowded. But actually, in terms of hardwares and infrastructure, there are many empty hospitals, clinics, community centers, where they have very, very nice infrastructure, but they don't have the expert that the patients trust or rely on. So the online solution not only give us the hope to have the possibility of a one-on-one patient and doctor relationship, and also we can better utilize those actually very state-of-art hardware and resources to equip them with the experts, those personnels, those top physicians, to be able to make available through online solution to patients where they can stay where they are. They don't really need to go to Shanghai or Beijing to save all those kind of troubles.
Thank you. I've had the signal that we have only 10 minutes left in the panel, and we would like to take some questions from the audience. If you'd like to ask a question, please raise your hand, and someone will bring you a microphone. Gosh. Have we any questions? Well, evidently not.
Maybe just use the time to share a little bit more on this data issue, because Mark mentioned the regulations, new laws, soon to come. So this is actually the dilemma I've been experiencing now in my work, because of course we all know that iOS is enhancing the user privacy policy as well. This is definitely from Apple, which is a private company, and it is essentially not a Chinese company either. So, but on the other side, we have government giving laws. But from my own perspective, from a VC perspective, right, we see the use of data, and we see that's the beauty how lots of startups has a relatively loose environment to grow their business. I give you an example. So for diabetic patients, right, so far, if you let's say if I schedule to see my doctor in November next month, what is the base for me to see my doctor in November? Why should I see him in November? Why not October? Why next January? Because the doctor says, hey, you come back to me 6 months later. Maybe my blood pressure, my blood sugar level is stable. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's not just right 1 month right after I saw him last time. Why I need to wait for 6 months? Why I shouldn't just see him like a year ago if everything goes smoothly on my side? So the data collection for such kind of a chronic disease is essential to help us to really better off the technology. And if more regulations, more laws is kind of regulating the space in a more tightening trend, I personally hold a concern. So it might be for my own curiosity as well to, really want to listen to, just have some insights from Mark on that perspective. He's a lawyer. But for me, on one side, I support to protect the privacy. On the other side, I saw that, kind of like a losing controlling environment empower the technology really to go faster, and essentially, the tightening environment is try to prolong the process. And we probably, I don't even know in the next 50 years I can use the technology when I reach my aging years.
I'm pretty optimistic about it. What Linda said just reminded me like 7 or 8 years ago, talking about diabetes, right? We were helping Sanofi exploring various online solutions to help manage those diabetes patients in the long run, like how to remind them to eat or drink correctly, to remind them do the injections, and even touching into some sensitive spaces like whether we can have staff to remind the patient if we see certain signals reaching certain threshold. Can we remind the patient to adjust the volume of injection? That may come to the diagnosis treatment sector, right? So I think this is maybe one of the most commonly asked questions, because I see the environment here. We have lots of venture and the startup companies, and they're always concerned about, we understand there are lots of regulatory bumpers there down the road, but it costs, right? And we want to grow the business first, and we know there are risks, but to solve those data protection issues, we need to set up system. If we want to get access to the HIS system of the hospital, we need to do verifications on the safety. It all costs money and it costs efforts. Well, my suggestion is, you need to really look at that under the context of the China legal and also practice in the daily practice. What are the theoretical risks and what are the practical risks? Of course, 100% compliance would be very ideal, but literally speaking, it will be very, very difficult for startups. So we need to know that within the gray area we have, in terms, no matter data protection or online diagnosis or selling drugs or promotion of products, you need to know where is the dark gray and where is the light gray, and you probably will try to keep on the light gray side of the risk appetite. And when you're growing into a volume stage, you may have more resources to look back on the compliance side. You want to make sure you started right, you probably set up the compliance infrastructure there, but you improve it along the time where you're reaching that stage. If you're not Sanofi yet, if you're not Eli Lilly or Merck yet, then you will have your own standard of compliance under the China context.
Do we have time for one more question, or 5 minutes, I say? Another question I've been curious to ask is about data quality coming out of hospitals now. How standardized is data? How usable is it? And how much work is it for companies to integrate with the hospital?
Yeah, that's a very good question. It's a very challenging problem in this whole sector. When I first look at the digital imaging, medical imaging digital medical imaging space, I was shocked by the variety of the data standard applied in this in the hospitals. You will be shocked by how many suppliers and even within one supplier, among all the devices, how many formats, how many standards they're applying just in one hospital, and not talking about data transfer between hospitals, not talking about sharing the data with end patients. This is a huge challenge in the whole industry. One positive trend is that, as I mentioned, there are some startups, and clearly they're now in their Series B, Series C round, so it means that they're doing great. They are doing something like collecting, or they build up another layer on top of all this format. They build up a unified protocol. So essentially, the artificial intelligence, deep learning, all these new technologies can use the data through these platforms. And I see this platform business as my main target to invest at this moment. I mean, this has been a trend in the past 1 year, and I foresee venture capital private equity funds will be more focusing on this trend for the next 2 years. It is eventually very hard to totally change the hospital's devices, equipments. You can't really even talk to GE and ask them to be standardized with other competitors, right, Medtronics. So there's no way to do that, to do things in that way. And building up an intermediate level, it's like an Android system for hospital. Can you imagine how powerful is Android system to a Google phone or to an Android phone, right? So companies focusing on that layer will definitely be our focus, and that's really my hope for this beautiful digital health future.
Yeah, I'm no expert in this area, but I do see it's very challenging, and it probably will take a fairly long time to really standardize those data, because in the real life, if you go to hospital A and you want hospital B to recognize all the records or the tests you have done in hospital A, it's still not easy yet. But we have seen some top-down initiative, and we know that some of our clients are actually helping the authority making that platform. So my personal feeling is it will happen, but very, very gradually down the road.
I just want to add one point, which we didn't really talk about. When people talk about digital health, we all think about patient. We think about hospital. Have we ever taken care of the doctors? Sometimes if you think about things in this way, right? I think Mark is a lawyer, I'm an investor. We can work from home. Can a doctor work from home? When they want to, hey, you're a doctor, I'm a doctor, we're kind of like planning on tomorrow surgery, operation. Can we really go into each other's office, or can we just do it remotely when I'm online? Can we really have a nice dinner with my daughter, and then after that I will do my work? Or I have to stay in my office, in my hospital at 7 p.m., which is my daughter's dinner time, and when I come back home, she's already in sleep. All kinds of things. The doctor, we see clear motivation from the doctors in the hospitals. They are embracing, they are the fundamental driving source to embrace this new technology. And they want flexibility, they want accuracy, they want high resolution of imagings from home. And I do see this is eventually, patient driving changes will be next to doctor driving changes.
Oh, it's an interesting note to end on, doctors. Don't forget the doctors. I think we're out of time. Yes, we are. And we started a bit late, so we should try to catch up. Thank you so much, both of you, for attending. I feel I learned a lot. And I hope you'll enjoy the rest of the day. For everyone else, thanks again for coming. And if you're a reader of TechNode, I and our other writers will be around the conference the entire day, so please come up and say hello. But now we will have the Shanghai Makerspace Awards ceremony, so please welcome to the stage my colleague Alina Tsao. And please help me to thank our panelists for attending and sharing insights. Thank you so much for coming.